just want to point out 3 reasons for why we, as the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung's New York office, are hosting this event on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the murder of Malcolm X. Number 1 is about the message. Malcolm X was a Grandmaster of Decolonization. The decolonization of Africa and the global South. The decolonization of white supremacist America. And let's not forget the decolonization of our hearts and our minds. He very well understood that the modern-day racial slavery of African people was both caused by capitalism and shaped by its early days. I promise to only quote one dead white dude today, but here you go with a quote from Karl Marx's Capital. He writes, "The discovery of gold and silver in America, the extirpation, enslavement, and entombment in mines of the aboriginal population, the beginning of the conquest and looting of the East Indies, the turning of Africa into a warren for the commercial hunting of blackskins, signalized the rosy dawn of the era of capitalist production. These idyllic proceedings are the chief momenta of primitive accumulation." Malcolm X knew very well about the interconnectedness of colonialism, capitalism, and racism. And his was the message of decolonization, the decolonization of the land, but also the decolonization of our hearts and our minds, because he understood that colonization is not just a political and economic system, it is also a mindset. Malcolm X did not beat around the bush, he was very clear about that. Steve Biko, father of South Africa's Black Consciousness movement, did get this message when he said, quote, "The most potent weapon of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed." And Harriet Tubman, the mother of the Underground Railroad, had known this back in the days when she famously said, "I freed 1,000 slaves. I could have freed 1,000 more if only they knew they were slaves." And here lies the brilliance of Malcolm X. As one of the world's leading voices against colonialism, at home and abroad, he knew we had to fight on both fronts, overthrow colonialism as a system and free ourselves from the colonial mindset, overcome colonialism and racism and capitalism. That's also why Malcolm X, in particular in his last year, opened up to socialist ideas that were in fact mushrooming in Africa at that time. Because he knew that capitalism and racism are inextricably linked, something that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. also knew too well. We are being taught that Malcolm X and Martin Luther King were constantly at odds, but in reality they were, as Preston Wilcox from the Malcolm X Lovers Network in Harlem once pointed out to me, simply brothers. That's what they were, brothers. And they were, as Black liberation theologist James H. Cone argued so eloquently, the yin and yang of the Black liberation struggle in the 1950s and 60s. I know they're not going to tell you that in school, but it's the truth. Martin Luther King advocated for socialism, for a revolution of values, for the full abolition of poverty, discrimination, and the system of that he called the white power structure. Or, as Fred Hampton said, you don't fight fire with fire. You fight fire with water. We're going to fight racism with solidarity. We're going to fight capitalism with socialism. Socialism is the people. The second thing I want to point out is this. Of all the possible aspects of Malcolm X's life, his personal evolution, his many transformations as a human being are key. He lived as the late Manning Marable, and we're so honored to have Leith Mullings, CUNY scholar and widow of Manning, speaking to us here today. Malcolm X lived what Manning Marable called in his great book, A Life of Reinventions. Malcolm X was never satisfied with what he had personally achieved. He would not take anything for granted. He would not stop questioning the powers that be. He would not stop searching for the truth. He would not stop criticizing white supremacy, and he would not stop advocating for black self-determination. Let's be clear, he would not give up the fight. Malcolm X would develop personally as a human being, all the way from the little kid in Lansing, Michigan, to an activist and agitator with a message to the world. A life of reinventions, a life of change, a life of progress. That's why to me, and to us at RLS in general, Malcolm X is still a comrade at first sight. Finally, number 3. Malcolm X was accused of preaching hate, of inciting violence during his life and ever since. But if you listen to his speeches, you can find out yourself that that's not true. Even in the famous passages where he makes the case that whites are the devil. Because if you really pay attention to his argument, you will find it was not so much about Jacob's history. Even as a minister of the Nation of Islam, his argument was mainly historical. In his reasoning, whites were not devils by nature. They were devils because they acted like devils and had historically acted as a collective devil. And well, there's simply no way of denying this one. At the same time, Malcolm X spread a message of love and liberation. As a true internationalist, he moved beyond the ideological narrowness of the Nation of Islam and opened up to the world. I remember how surprised I was when 20 years ago I met Harlem's own Yuri Kochiyama, who passed away last summer at the age of 93, reminding us of the fact that age-wise Malcolm X could still be alive today, could still be with us. I was stunned when this wonderful Japanese-American activist told me that back in the days, she'd been a member of the Organization of Afro-American Unity that Malcolm X founded in 1964. She actually still had her membership card signed by Malcolm X himself. This fact clearly demonstrates that his position was non-essentialist, that towards the end of his life, he would not only work with, but organize blacks along with other people of color. Hearing stories like the one Yuri Kochiyama had to share demonstrated how much he was about love. True, he did hate, but as Yuri Kochiyama said, Malcolm hated everything decent people should hate, such as racism. He hated capitalism, exploitation, and war. But of course, that's not the kind of hate that's being talked about by those who accuse Malcolm X of preaching hate. Ossie Davis, in his eulogy for El-Hajj Malik el-Shabazz, asked those who accused him of preaching hate, "Did you ever talk to Brother Malcolm? Did you ever touch him or have him smile at you? Did you ever really listen to him?" For one thing is clear. In his speech at Oxford on December 3rd, 1964, about which we will hear more by Tariq Ali in a few minutes, he finished by saying, and I quote, "People in power have misused power, And now there has to be a change, and a better world has to be built. And the only way it's going to be built is with extreme methods. And I, for one, will join in with anyone, I don't care what color you are, as long as you want to change this miserable condition that exists on this earth. And this is how I want to finish as well. We will join in with anyone as long as you want to change this miserable condition that exists on this earth. Plus, with the very last words of his at Oxford, which were, "Thank you."